You've been in the political sphere for a long time.
There are a bunch of views that I've held my whole life that used to be considered left-wing and are now considered far-right. Both of my parents were anti-Christian. My father would get me up at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning and make me watch televangelists because he felt that this would convince me of God's non-existence. You could do anything at church as long as you don't read from the Bible or say anything Christian, but everything else is up for grabs. I was trapped inside liberal culture. I would try and find a church, but because I was looking for a liberal church, I kept not finding God. In 1996, Van Robinson and I had supported the first viable transgender candidate for Vancouver City Council, Jamie Lee Hamilton, the brothel owner. These women in my group, both of whom were very long-time friends of mine, began speaking about their experiences of feeling unsafe as women on the street in Vancouver. And this gentleman, Nicole, he called himself, stood up and shouted them down because he felt they were being transphobic by talking about experiences that they had had as women that he had not. And they were therefore invalidating his sense that he was a woman. And I thought, well, this is not okay. It was realizing that I was being sucked into a peculiar kind of pride in my own virtue. It was heading towards my inevitable moral failure because I thought I was enough, that I was that special, in some small way godlike. And that's when I knew I had to submit and I had to accept God's love and his help.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on the Furiously Curious show. I appreciate it. I know you know very little about me, and I know very little about you, so those are my favorite interviews. But from what John told us, who introduced us, and from when I heard a little bit about your story when you got baptized, is that you've been in the political sphere for a long time as an activist, but I guess in a nutshell, moved from the left to the right over the last how many years?
Yeah, I would say in some ways, I think that it's more like the world moved around me. There are certain views, obviously, of mine that I've changed over the past 7 years, I would say. But there are a bunch of views that I've held my whole life that used to be considered left-wing and are now considered far-right. And so that's also part of the complexity. I feel like our whole society has gone through a massive cultural and social realignment. And really, when you're negotiating a huge amount of change, because society has changed for everyone, the question is, what do you save for? What do you choose to keep, and what do you choose to discard when your society is in the process of massive change? So, for instance, I've always been against open borders. That was a left-wing position 10 years ago. I've always been against free trade.
And not a right-wing position?
Well, I think I don't think anybody was in favor of open borders 11 years ago, except for certain people on the far right, the Koch brothers down south. They supported open borders. So you had people who were, I wouldn't even say far right, I would say corporate right, were the only supporters of open borders. And there's a reason for that. Like, we did this, like, a lot of the 2020s is just a do-over. We did a whole bunch of stuff in the 1920s and have forgotten how badly it went. And now we're making the same mistakes again. And that has to do with eugenics, fascism, open borders, installment plans, cross-dressing, you name it. These were part of our world in the 1920s, and
What do you mean that was part of our world? That was what
those were big things in the 1920s. Those were things people were excited about, and it's the mid 1920s where we end the open borders policy. We had most of the industrialized countries in the world, particularly in the New World. So from 1890 to about 1925, we had this phenomenon called called the immigration boom. I used to teach this at universities.
And this is in Canada, or this is in the West?
This is an international phenomenon.
Okay.
Huge numbers of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe moved considerable distances to start new lives. Tens of millions of immigrants. And there was competition for those immigrants. So Canada competed, Brazil, the United States, Argentina, Uruguay, the Ottoman Empire were all soliciting mass migration, mass uncontrolled migration. And it produced all the same things it's producing this time: social chaos, political violence, poverty.
In the countries where the people immigrate to?
Yes.
Okay.
Wages dropped, housing costs rose, all the same things we're seeing here, they happened in the 1920s. But back then, and so although the big companies,
I thought it happened in the 30s, because wasn't it like the roaring? Didn't they call it the Roaring 20s?
yeah, but that was a lot of that's propaganda. Yes, the economy grew. The economy grew because it was financed by installment plans. So there was major economic growth. The rich got richer, but actual affordability steadily fell throughout the 20s. From the end of the First World War until the mid 20s, affordability declined. And it actually kept declining for a while after the restrictions on migration, but the decline slowed because we'd restricted migration. And then, of course, the crash happened because we'd financed all of this economic growth through consumer debt. And the debts, and that had terrible knock-on effects. There was then increasing government debt, increasing consumer debt, and finally a collapse. So Canada was one of the countries that competed in the mass migration field, but we were actually pickier. We never went all in on open borders. John A. Macdonald didn't like open borders, and he was in power through into the early 1890s. And Sir Wilfrid Laurier, his government was a lot more supportive of open borders, but they were still much pickier. And they were more interested in getting agricultural labor than industrial labor.
And what was the drive of these countries to get the why were they competing for the immigration? What did they believe it would get them at that time? Do you know that?
Yeah. Some of the countries some of the countries had large black and indigenous populations, and they wanted their populations to become whiter. They believed that that was going to improve the country. And, I mean, that was not completely wrong in certain ways. Certainly, you can see that in Brazil, altering the mix of the country did produce some benefits. In particular, Brazil's interest in bringing in the Japanese really helped them develop their territory. But other reasons, well, a thing actually this immediately goes into a thing that we're dealing with in Canada right now. We keep talking about this genocide that happened here, and the reality is that most Indigenous loss of life in the New World was caused by smallpox, tuberculosis, influenza, measles, all these old world diseases. And what that meant was there were significant labor shortages. Countries were trying to industrialize, and you need big, dense, poor populations to industrialize in the first phase, right? You got people falling into vats of molten steel. You've got all these coal-fired industries. You need a lot of poor urban people in order to industrialize. And lots of countries were trying to industrialize at that time, or industrialize more rapidly, because they were competing against Western Europe, which was this industrial powerhouse. So this idea we can industrially catch up to Western Europe by importing Eastern Europeans and Southern Europeans and filling our cities with them. And that worked for the United States. It did leaven industrialization. It just also produced poverty and anarchist bombers and declining wages and political chaos. And so some of it was to replace a missing Indigenous population. So when Canada heavily recruited Ukrainians and Russians to move to Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, that was the motive. It was, we just didn't have enough boots on the ground. English people had once been really good at migrating in the early days of the United States, but that had slowed by the late 19th century.
And you just mentioned indigenous so-called genocide. What I don't understand why that was relative to what you were answering.
Because huge numbers of indigenous people did die in epidemics. The last smallpox epidemic in Canada took place during the building of the Alaska Highway in the 1940s. So there were there were people,
and they were the laborers that they were relying on, and so that's why.
in some cases, yes, for agricultural labor. You look at Alberta, for instance. The Blackfoot people made major contributions to Alberta agriculture, but a lot of those people, the population had to be replaced, and so they brought in Doukhobors and Hutterites and Mennonites to move into that work from Eastern Europe, and so. Yes, but some of it is just like even claiming sovereignty over an area. If you're claiming, I mean, we have this problem up to the present day, right? We're claiming sovereignty over the high Arctic, and the high Arctic has got, what, 200 people in it? Yeah, the Arctic has got 35,000, but the high Arctic? And that's why you see the United States, Denmark, Russia, other countries going, you don't really own those islands. So just getting people there, and in fact, we depopulated parts of northern Quebec right during the Cold War and relocated those Inuit people to the high Arctic in order to defend our claim to the territory. So, you know, if you don't have the boots on the ground, if you don't have the citizens, the place isn't really yours.
Yeah.
So there was, but that's the pull. There's also the push factor, right? The Russian Empire wasn't a great place to live back then. And you had, again, it's all a do-over, rapidly rising anti-Semitism in these territories. So there were real motivations for Jewish people, in particular, to leave, but also other religious minorities. Canada ended up with over half of all the Doukhobors in Russia, just because, so people are being pushed out of the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, with declining human rights, increasing anti-Semitism, etc. And at the same time, we're working off and at the same time, the biggest advocates for mass migration were, in the United States, were the National Association of Manufacturers. What they wanted was a compliant, cheap labor force. So they didn't want immigrants who spoke English fluently. One of the funny things...
And that was something that they would have actually verbatim articulated?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And they not just articulated, they built streetcar suburbs that would have people of only one language and religion in them to make sure that their neighbors were all spoke that language so they wouldn't pick up English. They funded multiculturalism. This is... The first wave of multiculturalism is funded by manufacturers, factory owners in the early 20th century. And they funded patriotic associations so that that people would stay loyal to the country they're from. And that made it hard to unionize the factory floor, and that kept the wages down.
Okay, so I want to get back to this topic, but I want to back up about how you got into the political sphere at all. Like, where did you grow up, and how did you get into politics?
Okay, well, this is so. I've always had an interest in politics. I think people who are gregarious but not very socially intuitive pick really sort of organized, ritualized ways of interacting with other people. So I think my personality predisposed me towards it. You know, most natural extroverts start out with have a natural talent at certain social skills. I didn't particularly. Another factor was it was around me. My family on my mother's side of the family were pretty politically active in various ways. My grandfather was
You grew up in Canada?
Yeah. I grew up in Vancouver, and my grandfather had been a socialist and a trade union activist. He was a railway porter, and back then there were racially discriminatory hiring policies. My grandfather was a black man, and so he organized the Porters Union. He was at the first convention of the NDP's precursor, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, back in 1932 in Regina. His son, my uncle Harry, had been a pretty major. He'd been pretty active in the Liberal Party initially. He felt betrayed by Trudeau's Liberals in the mid '70s, and he moved back to Vancouver and became the multicultural organizer for the Social Credit Party. So, opposite side of the spectrum from his dad, but. And then when my mother was going through her divorce, my uncle decided to take her mind off it by encouraging her to run in the 1978 Vancouver municipal election.
Your mom?
Yeah. So.
Oh, wow, okay.
So
how old would you have been?
6. So I was handing out leaflets in the park when I was 6.
Wow.
So that's so it was all pretty early on growing up in Vancouver. And then
did you have much relationship with your dad after your parents divorced? Because you were divorced
yeah,
at 5?
Yes, I did. I did. My father was very, very involved in my life and a very positive force in my life until he moved away when I was 9. And after that, I saw him a couple of times a year. And, we stay in touch up to the present day. He's,
And so was he political?
He was briefly. He had played basketball in high school with Mike Harcourt. So when Harcourt became leader of the NDP, my father did a bunch of work on that.
Okay. But either way, you were handing out leaflets at 6 years old because your mom was running for the Vancouver.
Yeah, for Vancouver Parks Board.
Okay.
And
so your mom became political after that?
She wasn't continuously politically active in the capital P politics but she was elected to, she had some fairly junior position in the BC Teachers Federation that she was elected to in the 80s. Her best friend went on to become a major BCTF official. And, so that was going on. My uncle died in 1982, and my uncle Harry had been on and off the fastest man in the world from 1959 to 68. He represented Canada in the 60, 64, and 68 Olympics. And so my mother spent much of the 80s fundraising and organizing to get that 9-foot-tall bronze statue of him put up in Stanley Park. So, and at those events...
That was the goal, or that's actually a thing?
That's a thing, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
cool.
there's... you still... it's on postcards and whatnot. So by Hallelujah Point. And... It's pretty impressive. And so my mother had these monthly meetings of the Harry Jerome Commemorative Society in our living room. And the people who composed that board were mostly not my mother's friends. They were the friends of my late uncle. And so they were all, my uncle was very closely associated with Grace McCarthy when she was deputy premier. And so we'd have all these social credit organizers in the living room once a month. And Jerry Strongman had been the Minister of Health under the second Bennett. So, so these were just the waters I was swimming in as a kid.
Organizing and fundraising and all that.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. Okay, yeah. And then politically, did you grow up in a religious home at all? Like, were you taught anything regarding worldview or...
I would say, in hindsight, both of my parents were anti-Christian. Anti-Christian. My father would do the weirdest thing on weekends sometimes when I would go to stay with him as a kid. He would get me up at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning and make me watch televangelists like Jimmy Swaggart because he felt that this would convince me of God's non-existence.
Oh, wow.
My mother, on the other hand, my mother's a very effective social climber in Vancouver, and she got us involved in the Unitarian Church, which I would argue is an anti-Christian church.
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so the Unitarians are one of the most extreme liberal churches you can find today. For instance, they have a special sacrament for transing your kid.
What would it have
So-
in the 70s? Would that have been there already then?
No.
Okay, so what was liberal about it in your time?
In the 1970s, the preacher, the minister, Philip Hewitt, told people that they had to vote NDP in the '83 election. That you were actually you weren't welcome in the church if you voted for the Social Credit Party. The church's main activity was sending volunteers and money to the Sandinista socialist regime in Nicaragua. So that was a major activity of
So
the
why was your mom
Unitarians.
interested in church at all if she was anti-Christian? Like what? Just because this?
Well, I mean, the Unitarians were an anti-Christian church, and this was a great way to meet influential intellectuals in the city. In many ways, the Unitarian Church on Sunday morning was a group of people who had gone to the Vancouver Institute lecture at UBC the night before and wanted to talk about it more. That's what it was like. So, very, very intelligent people, but not Christians in any meaningful way. There's no.
And what was
We
this-
never read from the Bible. There's no cross. There's our hymns. A lot of them were Jewish. It was like it's like the whole country is today. You could do anything at church as long as you don't read from the Bible or say anything Christian, but everything else is up for grabs.
That's sadly funny. Okay, so and why were your parents anti-Christian? There was something that happened to them in their like. How did they get to that spot? You know that?
I think they were just typical of their generation. They were silent generation, secular intellectuals. They were, and at the time, the political left had a very vibrant intellectual scene. If you're that was the assumption. Also, we didn't understand how separate our culture already was from Christian culture. So when you heard bad things about what Christian culture was like, you really didn't know anybody to check that against, right? There weren't really reliable informants about what
It's not
was
like you
going
knew a
on
lot
in
of
the
Christians
church.
yourselves.
No, we swam in different in these different waters, and even my uncle's friends, right? They I'm sure many of them would have said they were Christians, but these were not religiously observant people. These were business people, and Vancouver's a notoriously unchurched city. Always has been. Very unlike the rest of Canada for most of its history. We used to be the most churched nation in the world, but that was never true of southwestern British Columbia.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so you get into your teen years and early 20s. You were started being politically active then already? Like, what did you go to school for something? Did you?
My mother had came out of a very difficult family system. She and my uncle were surprisingly successful, given the family system they came out of.
Part of the reason why they might have been.
Yeah. So one of the people who was very important in our lives was a woman named May Cannon. She was a major political activist in the NDP, and she introduced me to Sven Robinson. At this point, he hadn't yet come out. This is where.
What year would this have been?
So this would be 1985. He came out as gay in '88.
Okay. So he was already political back then.
So Robinson was elected in '79 as quite a young man.
Wow.
He was he was in his 20s when he first won, because I'm going to be giving Richard Prosey a little bit of a hand with his school board bid this fall for re-election, and I have to say, in a funny way, Richard reminds me of Sven Robinson because Sven is such a natural retail politician. He would get up in the morning, and as soon as he was anywhere, he'd be shaking hands and remembering people. He was a master of that art. People will remember him as, extreme left, etc. But what they were always redrawing his writing to try and get rid of him. And he would go through elections and everybody would want to vote for him irrespective of their views. He was such an effective member of parliament. And he had really good ideas about how to maintain a connection with his constituents. Like he endowed a small scholarship at every high school in his riding so that he would be there shaking hands with your kid when they graduated. That kind of thing. So I got involved. I was already quite concerned about, I was already quite concerned about the environment. He was the big environmentalist in the party. And I was concerned about the constitutional crisis that was starting, the Meech Lake Accord. Sven was the only MP saying that the Meech Lake Accord was bad back in the day. And so got involved with Sven, got in his riding association. I guess I was elected as his youth rep when I was 14. And then when the NDP really turned against Sven over Meech Lake and some of these other issues, I quit and joined the Green Party. So I was elected to the board of the
Why did you quit
Vancouver. I quit the NDP because the NDP was whipping the vote on the Meech Lake Accord in the legislature and in Parliament, and I felt the Meech Lake Accord was a bad piece of constitutional law, all that distinct society crap and all the other things. And back then, the only people who were really publicly opposing it were like the talk show host Rafe Mayer, Preston Manning, leader of the Reform Party, which didn't have any seats yet at that point, and Pierre Trudeau. So anyway,
What I find is interesting, just to interrupt you there, is that you chose to leave the NDP under a principled stance of that they were like forcing people to vote a certain way, and so it showed that you had your own that shows me at least that you had your own convictions and not just what the party told you should do or believe, which I think is somewhat unique on both sides of the aisle today as well.
We've become very, very tribal.
Yeah, yes, but also just saying that the leader says I should say this, so this is what I'm saying, and the individual isn't necessarily saying their opinion anymore and willing to take a stand on things and be principled. Where did that come from for you? Like, was that just something you saw your mom doing? Was it naturally that you just had your belief systems and you were willing to just say, hey, I don't think this is right, and I'm gonna leave the party now because of this?
It's a really interesting question. One of the things that's coming out in this conversation is, because I'm so new to Christian culture, I'm always discovering things about how different it is. And, your questions of the formation of character, family, things like this, this is a really healthy optic, but you're asking me questions that I haven't formulated in that way. The first thing I would say is to apply at least a touch of some level of humility. It was a lot easier to do that back in the day. Like, we were watching the beginnings of this culture of conformity in our parliament.
Okay.
The law was different, the culture was different, and in fact, right now, if people want to go to my Substack or my website, I'm in the middle of this 4-article series I'm writing about how we changed into such an autocratic tribal society between 1969 and the present. So I grew up in a world where doing something like that wasn't so consequential.
And was it more common? Was it more common?
Yeah, it was. It was. People did, and MPs.
People had principles.
Yeah,
more.
MPs. Because it was easier. Like, Sven Robinson is caved under pressure now. Sven Robinson is a tribal conformist now, because the pressure became overwhelming because our society has become less free. And So I was living in a freer society, and I was, you know, one of the other funny things that's going on right now is, teenage boys these days are really stepping up for a change. And usually, like, that's an interesting sign in a culture
Yeah.
where a lot has to go wrong
Yeah.
in a society for you to start seeing teenage boys as a guardrail,
Yeah.
as something to lean on, as something that's a pro-social force. Teenage boys are contrarians, they're rebellious. This might have been a very geeky form of rebellion, but I also want to credit it to, the physical and neurological changes that you're just going through as you become an adult.
Yeah.
And this was how I decided to not conform. I was a really twitchy, geeky kid. It's not like, I would have been welcome to go and smoke behind the school or
Yeah.
whatever. So some of it's natural, some of it's luck. I do think that my parents, however, I do think that they did instill in me this idea of being principled and taking a non-conforming role. When my parents got married, I think there were 14 states in the U.S. where their marriage was illegal. So that involves some sticking your neck out.
Because?
My mother was black.
Oh, okay.
And so interracial marriage was the last interracial marriage laws were repealed in the U.S. in 1982. So,
And would you have been aware of that in your?
oh yeah, that sort of
Okay.
I knew my civil rights struggle back to front. That was really
Okay.
important to the family tradition.
Okay.
So,
So that would have shaped you politically somewhat as well then.
oh yes. Yeah, and one of the heroes of my family, and we later came to know his protege, was Paul Robeson, who was the great black communist athlete, singer, actor of the Cold War, who was blacklisted and whose life was destroyed because he took a solitary stand. So yeah, so there were so that those values were instilled, and then went off and joined the Greens. I had also just read.
And just to back the question on Sven Robinson and just like your political views, so when he came out in '88 as being gay, what was your reaction to that at that time? Was that something that you would have been promoting and for, like that people?
I would say that I on the one hand, oh yeah, sure, if it's Sven Robinson, absolutely. Did I? One of my best friends was gay. We all both knew and didn't know that. We had a double consciousness about it. Did I treat my friend Steve as well as I treated my friend Sven? No. No, I would say that, gay panic is natural in human males. It is an evolutionary necessity for boys in their teens to be disgusted by homosexual activity. That's not our culture. That's not bigotry. That's keeping the species alive. And
You would have had that view as a liberal in the '80s.
no, that's a view I've come to in the past few years of my life. Because it becomes obvious once you strip away all of the liberal pieties. Does that mean I don't think gay people should be equal? No, of course not. I was proud to be associated with Sven, but I just also want to acknowledge the hypocrisy. I wasn't exactly
But what would your
living
thinking have
those
been,
views.
your thinking have been back in the '80s? And
I felt like Sven and I were on the cutting edge of positive social change.
okay.
That I would have said that with enthusiasm, and of course Sven presented it to me in a very intelligent way. He told me that he had been ordered by Ed Broadbent, then the leader of the party, to not come out until after the election. And of course, I was very down on Broadbent because he'd also ordered Sven to vote for the Meech Lake Accord. So, so it was presented to me as an act of defiance, and it's sad, right, when people have to be tactical about how they give other people important news. But I'd be foolish to say Sven wasn't being tactical in how he presented it to me. He told me this at a gas station, actually, in Burnaby. He was driving me somewhere because he was still trying to get me back in the NDP. And I remember really vividly because he then started talking to the gas station attendant. And I said, "Oh, where are you from?" She said, I'm from Sarajevo." And and he said, "Oh, so you're actually a." He said, "So you're a Croatian?" She goes, "No, I am a Yugoslavian." And we didn't know what that meant at the time, or I guess, yeah. And now, of course, we do. The Yugoslav Civil War hadn't happened yet, so. So it's a very vivid memory to me because there was this weird interaction with the gas station attendant. We thought it was weird because it's like Yugoslavia was a communist project. So like,
Yeah.
why would she be so committed to this after having come to the West? And then we found out. So yeah, Sven presented that to me. I didn't have any problem with
At a
it.
gas station.
Yeah, in Burnaby.
About what? About him being gay? Or?
Yeah,
Oh,
he
okay.
told me that, and then once that was over, he started talking to the attendant because he's a retail politician. He's always talking to everybody.
Okay, crazy. Okay, so then you go to the Green Party, but you're very much shaped by, like, what would you have said the foundation of your worldview was back then? Was it just social issues that had shaped you, or like did you think deeper on like why are we here? Like, what's this all about?
Yeah, it's again, you're asking a question I haven't asked myself. I'm gonna have to sit here I think that I believed in I think I would argue I believed in a secular version of the beliefs of the American black churches, like African Methodist Episcopal Zion.
What does that
Those
mean?
churches, those churches saw black people as the true Israelites, not in a literal sense.
Okay.
But they believed that when black people in the South first started mass converting to Christianity in the 1840s, initially the plantation owners had used this as a way to, they thought it would make the slaves more docile. But instead, what happened was the slaves heard this story and awaited Moses to lead them out of Egypt. That
Why is this making you
special.
emotional? Why is this making you emotional?
I guess I still really care about that stuff.
What stuff?
I I I guess what I would say is that they're that I think that there is something powerful and important about people seeing themselves in that story. And I think that's one of the things to understand about us, 40 years ago, is that you didn't really have to go to church because we were still swimming in Christian waters. It was only a generation and a half since real secularization had hit Canada. And back then, Northrop Frye, the great Canadian novelist, said, you know, you don't, when people read novels then, the symbolic language of the novel was from the Bible. All of the narrative tropes were from the Bible. You were getting all this stuff indirectly. And so the fact that we didn't believe in God, we were still in a Christian culture. And the story of any enslaved people finding purpose, finding mission. Those are the best stories. And yeah,
My question to you was, what was the foundation of your worldview at that time?
yeah.
And I want to get back to why that is a question that you haven't thought about a lot. But your
Hmm.
answer was, I think it was the black church in the South
Hmm.
as the foundation, and then as it relates to the fact that they related themselves to the Israelites and who were enslaved by the Egyptians, and that Moses led them out, and so there was a belief among the churches in the South, the black church in the South, that a Moses type figure was going to come and rescue them.
No, the black churches tended to read that as Lincoln.
Oh, okay.
Uh, there's some very interesting testimonies of former slaves who escaped and joined the Union Army, which again, right, they're emancipating themselves through military service, through fighting this what they really understood to be a religious war, a
Mm.
holy war against the South.
And you would have been very aware of all those stories because your mom was black.
Yeah,
Okay.
and because we and to get back to May Cannon, who but my mother had had two foster mothers in her late teens because she'd had to run away from home, and so May Cannon and Sheila Thompson were both NDP organizers who also supported the Freedom Riders in the 60s. The volunteers who went to the southern states to register black voters.
Okay.
So my mother,
Interesting. That was it.
interestingly,
That was the NDP back then.
yeah, and her interestingly, it wasn't her mother or really even her father who steeped her in that lore. It was the white women who looked after her in high school who really who did this. And I think that's so that's an interesting irony. But yeah, we were very much part of that tradition, and I think that probably, in terms of our values, that probably meant a lot.
So I guess then to summarize, it was a drive or a need or for justice to happen, and that was really shaping your foundation.
Yes.
And that's why it also makes you emotional because this was something that was so tied to what you heard a lot growing up, or what?
No, I strange things make me emotional.
But it touches,
I
touched
generally,
something.
yeah, I generally, um, I'm a sucker for stories in which people free themselves.
Hmm.
I love those stories, and not just from my own cultural tradition. I would go on to become a supporter of an organization called the Lil'wat Peoples Movement, which was a very different kind of indigenous politics than what we see today. Because these stories, where I think I began to diverge from my mother, is my mother became one of these early adopters of this anti bullying education idea, where my mother was very effective at using false accusations of racism in order to get ahead. I mean, she didn't believe it was false. My mother saw racism behind absolutely everything that went wrong in her life. She believed someone had done something intentionally to her because they were racist.
And did you believe that too for a time?
The mask began to tear pretty early.
Mm.
Um, my mother was very effective as an anti-bullying educator because she was the biggest bully in her classroom. The other bullies were terrified of her.
Mm.
And no, it was probably, it was, no, I would say that it was because I used my mother's predisposition to do something quite politically shameful early in my political career that made me start questioning this. But I liked the
You
part
did
of
something
this.
shameful, or you felt your
I
mom
did
did?
something shameful. I've done so many shameful
Yeah.
things politically. This is half of what keeps me going politically, is that I've made so many mistakes that if I can just get to the end and undo the damage I myself have done, I'll call that a win.
Okay. Do you mind sharing what that was, or you don't?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very politically. I wanted to build the Green Party into an effective electoral vehicle, and when I joined, not everybody in the party wanted to do that. A lot of people had some very strange ideas about what to use the party for, that they were going to use the party to build the embryo of the society that we were to become, that somehow if they just created a microcosm of the future society, that which was not helpful. It didn't involve running candidates. It didn't involve actually contesting elections in a serious way. So I I organized a confrontation where, I mean, the Green Party in Vancouver was overwhelmingly white. It was all these sort of, white boomer types who usually were working at the margins of post secondary education, living in co op houses in East Vancouver, wearing corduroy sport jackets and the like. There's a stereotypes exist for a reason. A lot of guys with full body beards. And so there was a real problem as to the party had an insane voting system. They didn't conduct votes. You had to reach an absolute consensus. And so it was a decision by attrition. And so it didn't matter how many members I signed up, I couldn't push through any of the things I wanted.
Yeah.
So I got my mother to seek the party nomination for mayor in the 1990 election. They had run her, the hippies had run her for Parks Board 10 years after her mainstream Parks Board bid. She got the most votes any Green had ever got in Canada when she ran in 88. But initially, they had pushed her into doing that because they were going to refuse to run any candidates unless there was one female candidate in the municipal. And so they basically said, well, we're just not going to campaign unless you run for Parks Board. So my mom ran. She did pretty well. So in 1990, the Green Party was non-hierarchical. So the party didn't have a leader, and they didn't believe in running people for the position of mayor. And my mother also didn't like the people running the Vancouver Greens for a number of legitimate and illegitimate reasons. I didn't like them very much. And so my mother sought the mayoral nomination. They refused to agree to the mayoral nomination, and I knew what my mother would do next, which was to publicly humiliate them and accuse them of racism. I mean, her being black was a feature, not a bug to those people. They fetishized how black she was. So it was a completely unfair accusation, but it got the job done. Those people withered under the criticism and quit, and I was able to seize control of the Vancouver organization. So I would say that was
And what
that
did
was the
you
moment.
feel shame about that? Did that shame come right away, or?
It was a double consciousness.
Okay.
I've been afflicted with a lot of double consciousness until about 10 years ago, where you know and don't know things, you believe and don't believe things. A lot of your subconscious leaving you notes on the fridge kind of would be my metaphor for it.
Why do my questions about what the foundation of your worldview is in the 70s, 80s, why is that a unique question for you, or something you haven't thought a lot about?
Because I it never really occurred to me that worldviews had foundations. Not in terms of like ideologically, I can understand an ideology and I go, this is the order in which you put things together. This is actually the core belief that underlies these beliefs. I can build all that, but I don't think about that stuff personally or chronologically. It had never occurred to me that I would have a foundation, that my beliefs would have a foundation, or that there was some order in which things were placed atop that foundation. And also it was activating because it's a class of question that reminds me of how much work I still have to do to live in the world in which I now live. That I have so many assumptions, so much programming that I don't even know I have. And when I'm in a Christian context now, in some ways, I lived recently. I lived in Africa for a year. In many ways, I feel more culturally
At home, comfortable.
no, I wouldn't say that exact. I'd say that I find myself wondering how weird I sound or how weird I look here in Chilliwack, in the communities I move in now, than I worried about in Tanzania. That because and
Why would you be perceived as weird?
well, I don't. I don't know. I mean, I am a foreigner in some ways to Christian culture. I have, right, there are questions it doesn't occur to me to ask. And for every question it doesn't occur to me to ask, there are three assumptions I walk into a conversation with that probably aren't true now.
Fair enough.
And I have and I have this consciousness of that. It's like, oh, do we actually mean the same thing, or why do I assume this?
You're still learning lots.
yeah,
Right?
there's
Yeah.
a tremendous amount to learn. The you know I have a PhD in religious studies. I know theology pretty well, but that has nothing to do with your day-to-day lived experience of actually
Yes.
having a Christian life.
Yeah, I have that same experience.
Say more about that.
Well, that you can learn theology and know all the right things, but not see it or live it out yourself practically. It's very different. And if you don't see it being lived out, but you have the knowledge of it, then you believe that living it out is just only saying you believe it,
Yes.
which then gives you a really twisted view of what the word belief even means. And to believe in something. Because if you believe in something, there's an action associated with it. Otherwise, you don't believe it. You just say you do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, were you a cradle Christian? Did you grow up in the faith?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, yeah.
So that must.
I'm a Baptist now.
You're a Baptist, and you started out as
Great,
Dutch.
yeah, Dutch Reformed. Yeah.
Yeah,
My dad was a Dutch Reformed pastor,
and
so I grew up in the heart of it.
wow, yeah, that is, and I mean, that's a thing that you see. I mean, to make the comparison to what I was saying earlier about the Northrop Frye's observation, that's what I feel here is that people might have various religions, but the cultural substrate here is totally Dutch Reform.
Yeah, yeah. Locally here, yes.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's that's a special thing about Chilliwack.
Yeah, very unique. Yeah, I want to go back to what you said earlier about you felt shame, and so you felt a strong desire to make right your wrongs that you had done along the way. And it reminds me of your testimony that you gave when you got baptized a year ago or so. I only happened to be at that service for a buddy that was getting also baptized, and I just happened to hear you there, and we haven't talked since, or I guess we hadn't talked at all. But I remember you saying something in there in that you had a somewhat utopian view that if you just worked hard enough that we could make all things right.
Yes.
And we could make this world how it should be. Is my memory recall that
Absolutely.
correctly?
And actually, I've just recently been exploring that in my writing because of stuff that's come up at church. Um, we're having a little bit of a tough time at church. I'm sure word is word has gotten out. And I love Grace Fellowship. It's a great church, but because it wasn't built out of ideas, it was built out of persecution. People who wanted to keep meeting during the lockdowns, irrespective of their particular kind of Christianity. That really excited me about the church, right? That because I didn't want to be in a thing that was made out of ideas. I wanted to be in a thing that was made out of people and experiences. But the flip side of that is there are massive doctrinal disagreements within the church, and so I have, and I'm probably on no side in the disagreement because I don't want my Christianity to be defined in that way. But there are a bunch of post-millennial optimistic Dutch reformers and a bunch of Darbyite dispensationalists and struggling to be together. And so it has forced me.
As an outsider coming
Yeah.
into Christian culture and this being all new to you, how do you observe? Like, because I don't want to get into what's right or wrong.
Yeah, of course.
But as an outsider coming in, how do you observe that when you see these groups of Christians having tension with each other while still believing in ultimately the bigger foundational issues of the gospel, and then not being able to see eye to eye on these other issues, and there being tension there? Is that odd for you to experience?
No, not at all. I mean, what I'm trying to do is actually not make it ordinary. Because as I've been doing politics and organizing, and I've taken on leadership roles in my life and tried to maintain communities and have spent years learning about what those principles are, I could totally secularize what I'm seeing. I could drop the ideas right out, and I see very typical patterns of how humans interact when they're having a disagreement. Because, as Augustine says, even in the church, the city of man rules, and the city of God is an embattled minority. And I totally
I've never
feel
heard that quote, but I love that. That is a very good description.
So, but to get to the lesson from this is, I really expected to just agree with the post-millennial reformers. They're the people who introduced me to the church. They're my friends. They do politics, right? Whereas dispensationalists, not so politically involved. But I realized I actually had a bit of a problem with this, because the thing that I think has gone wrong with liberals and progressives in Canada, I trace some of it to the last gasp of when they were Christians. They embraced this thing called the social gospel, this idea that it's an extreme form of postmillennialism, where human beings together simply build the kingdom. God, Christ, these are bystanders in. And William Lyon Mackenzie King, before he became prime minister, the office in which he served for 25 years, quarter of the 20th century, he built a lot of Canada. He wrote a book advocating an extremely radical form of postmillennialism that denied the divinity of Christ. And so a lot of people want to blame Karl Marx for a lot of stuff. And I'm not saying Karl Marx doesn't deserve to be blamed for anything, but the kind of crazy socialism you get in Canada is not Karl Marx. It's these postmillennialists. It's Tommy Douglas, J.S. Wordsworth, and Mackenzie King, who came up with this form of godless postmillennialism. And so I'm sort of hanging out with my pastor, and he's more of a dispensationalist, and I'm saying, well, actually, this question of last things doesn't really concern me. The eschaton is God's business, not mine. But that's the thing. I think the eschaton is God's business. It's not our eschaton. It's
What's
his. The end. The millennium.
Okay.
And my pastor says, well, yeah, I don't really understand. Like, if we can just build the kingdom ourselves, and Jesus shows up at the end, what's he even supposed to do? I said, I think he's supposed to host an awards ceremony. I think he's supposed to give out little plaques, because that is how Canadian progressives and liberals thought before the whole idea of the millennium disappeared into the subconscious. So I have rejected that.
Yeah.
It's like, no, actually, it matters that his kingdom is not of this world. There are things we can do in its service in this world. We can prepare for the kingdom, but it's his, it's not of this world. And that idea of the perfectibility or the self-perfectibility of humankind, that is an idea that really animated me for a long time that I have
that's
rejected.
That's where
Yeah.
you came out in your testimony, which I think is the same thing as the social gospel. It becomes the social gospel and humanitarian work becomes your Christ because everybody, I think, has a level of guilt in them that they don't like, and so they hope they can work themselves above it, around it by doing more. But the whole point of the gospel, I believe, is saying, no, I can't do more. Jesus did it, and I trust what he did, and now I go and, out of thankfulness for what's already done, move forward and being forgiven of my guilt. But I couldn't fill the gap. And so,
Yeah, that there is something extremely vain, extremely arrogant about believing that you can replace God with yourself, that you can do his job. And
consciously, they wouldn't say that, of course.
yeah, but and in fact, I would argue that, there's a project I've started work on. People, even Christians, actually especially Christians, because I think we've lost so much confidence over time. A lot of confidence in the Christian message has been beaten out of us. When I listen to conservative politicians, they'll often say, well, am I allowed to do this? I said, well, nobody on the left would ever ask whether they were allowed. Their job is to make it permissible, not to decide not to listen to others about what is permitted. And so I think that confidence has been shaken, and so we will make social scientific arguments, we'll make sociological arguments, economic arguments, anthropological arguments, when we actually should make religious and theological arguments about certain things. You want to understand wokeness? You need to use religious terms. It is an American space religion. There is a particular taxonomy of different kinds of religions, and this is wokeness is your classic American space religion. It is like Farrakhan's Nation of Islam, it is like Joseph Smith's Mormonism, and it's like L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology.
It becomes a religion of its own church.
And a godless religion. No American space religion believed in the divinity of God.
Yeah.
Every American space religion teaches that the function of the religion is for you to become God.
Which means that the people then become the describers of what morality is.
Yes.
Which has no foundation. Okay, I want to go back to how you got to becoming a Christian. So you're very liberal. You're very active in the political space. I read your biography. People can look it online and on the different parties that you supported and activated for, and were, I think, very effective in that. But you had an underlying motivation of the liberal version of the social gospel.
Yeah.
of trying to make everything perfect. Talk to me about that. How did that progress throughout your life, and when did it start to erode and crash down into Christ?
I think that there's a story so my friend Bruce Duville, great guy. He and I were in grad school together, and he's still he's a professor at the university in Sault Ste. Marie, and he did his doctoral thesis on this movement that no longer exists in Canada. It had spread from the United States. It was called the Jesus Freak movement, and it appeared in the early 70s here. And the founder of the Canadian Jesus Freak movement, Bruce told this story in his thesis. It's a great metaphor. He said this guy had he was a classic late 60s, early 70s hippie, Vietnam War resistor, whatever, and he was in High Park in Toronto, and he took a bunch of LSD, and for the next 12 hours, every time he looked over his shoulder, Jesus would be peering at him from behind something. And I think that's a pretty good metaphor for a lot of my life. I would say that there were hundreds of moments where I felt like I was heading in that direction and then something else would happen. And I would encounter a different kind of, I'd get this message that, that I needed, that there was something that I was a Christian, that I should become a Christian. When I founded my institute, Los Altos, in 2012, I insisted on founding it as an explicitly Christian organization, even though I was putting forward
Were you already Christian
Marx.
at the time?
No.
Why would you put it?
Right. Why would I do that? I couldn't explain to people why this was important in 2012. I just had this feeling that something was coming. I had tried.
I got to back up here.
Yeah.
This is so confusing.
Yeah.
So you're very liberal. You're like somewhat anti-Christian.
Well, no, I never adopted the anti-Christianity of my parents.
Okay.
That was I was never intolerant towards Christians.
Okay.
Ignorant, yes. Intolerant, no.
Okay. What would your view have been of Christians in the 2000s?
And I thought that my father's worldview was silly.
Oh.
My father had a set of really bizarre, specific convictions that it's actually this is an interesting point. My father's convictions, which were like religious convictions, seemed totally uncompelling to me. That they didn't seem to be based on anything. There was no foundation. They seemed utterly arbitrary. And so I kind of rejected the worldview my father was selling. But when I tried to become involved in Christianity, I made lots and lots of mistakes. But it starts pretty early. Like I decide I want to do my PhD in religious studies in 2003.
And was that for a particular reason?
I always found theology fascinating.
Okay.
I found Mormonism especially bizarre. And so I thought, I could study this. This is really weird, and it would give me great material for a Dungeons and Dragons game. Okay. That actually is what initially motivated me to study Mormonism in the late '90s before I even went back to school. Okay. Yeah, I think Joseph Smith is America's first dungeon master. Whatever you think about, because you got the levels and the monsters and the crazy whatever. So I would say I made my first sort of foray towards religiosity and my choices about my studies, and then I moved to Toronto. To do graduate school in 2004, and I was, and my first landlady was a member of a very, very, very liberal Anglican church, and knowing my academic interests and my record of organizing, she was a communist. She wanted to, she never worked a day in her life. She had a trust fund, Ocean Spray Cranberry Trust Fund. Anyway, she said she wanted to, she and the gay couple who ran her Anglican church wanted to put on a conference about the big controversy that was ripping up the Anglican Communion about blessing of same-sex marriages. And so I helped them put on this conference, and I guess at that point I was thinking, well, I guess I'm a member of this Anglican church, and we're gonna do this, and this is gonna be my Christianity. But instead, something happened at the conference that was so off-putting, I turned and walked away, and that was that. Everybody at the conference is white, and they bring in the Manchester Guardian's religion reporter, Stephen Bates, who's written a book about the controversy. And everybody starts talking about how the problem in the church is the Africans and how primitive they are. How,
at a gay conference.
Right. You got all these white people who found a social loophole for saying really, really racist things about their black co-religionists.
How does that loophole work?
Well, the churches, the bishops in the Anglican Church that opposed same-sex blessings were overwhelmingly in Africa. So the problem was Africans and how primitive they were. And I'm like, you're saying it's the gays versus the blacks? I'm out of here. I'm out of here. I don't want anything to do with this. I don't have a dog in this fight. But you're not going to say something mean about the black church around me.
Yeah.
And so that was a setback. And then I also looked at joining a post-Mormon liberal church called the Community of Christ. That was probably my next attempt. And I think as long as I was trapped inside liberal culture, I would try and find a church, but because I was looking for a liberal church, I kept not finding God. And I never imagined. I mean, I remember hearing people say stuff like that on the radio and on TV. I could never have imagined, even 10 years ago, that I would be sitting here saying those words. But as my lawyer in Tanzania would say, this is further proof that God has an excellent sense of humor.
What when you say heard things on TV, what was that?
I just mean that when people were talking about how you couldn't really have liberal Christianity, I would never have taken that seriously. And I don't think that's true at all times and places, because the world changes and liberals were not always the creatures they have become. But they have become those creatures now.
Yeah.
And so I think as long as I was in that half of the society, as I was in that tribe, I would just find my engagements with Christianity bloodless and disillusioning.
Understood. Okay, so you're somewhat in no man's land, but care about justice a lot and making your wrongs right and dealing with your guilt. 2012 comes around, you start an organization, and you want it to be explicitly Christian.
Yes.
What does that even mean? Like, was that in your statement of beliefs?
Yes, it's our motto was from the Bible, and right at the beginning, it's like, this is a Christian organization, Los Altos
run
Institute.
by, and knowing yourself, you weren't a Christian.
No, and there were no Christians on the board of directors either. I mean, I might have called myself a cultural Christian at that point, or a liberal Christian, or an unchurched Christian. I don't think I was those things at that point. But what I had begun to notice was that progressives were lying to ourselves about who the intolerant people in society were. Going back to that experience with my mother way back in 1990, realizing that accusing people of intolerance or bigotry was such an effective way of bullying people, I began to, once people started going a little far with the gay marriage, like forcing Christians to participate, I thought, no, I think we've become the bullies. Like, yes, gay people were the bullied people 30 years ago, but the wheel turns. The wheel turns. And so I wanted to make sure that there was an organization in which people of faith felt safe. And I had figured out that that non-Christians felt safer in Christian organizations than in secular organizations. That Christians were less likely to be bigoted towards people of other faiths.
Conscious thought you
had?
had?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Wow.
That was an observable fact I was seeing on the left.
Wow. And
this was in the days of the new atheism with Hitchens and Dawkins. Now Richard Dawkins is on Twitter defending Christianity every day. Yeah. There are people, some of us have realized our mistake. And, maybe I was a little ahead of Dawkins and company and seeing where this was going to go.
As you were observing this, did you discuss it with your liberal friends and be like, hey, do you guys notice this is like happening? Or was that just more thoughts you had?
That's yourself? A really good question, because the answer is no, I didn't. Because it's between 2012 and 2015 that I really start dissembling about my own views, that I can see where my tribe is headed. And I see all these great opportunities, right? Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders and all these people who are like far left like me, who, if I just shut up and go along, they'll succeed. And these are old men who remember things being better and different. They won't enact the policies of the present day left. These guys will bring back the left that I wanted. And so, yeah, I started really not expressing my actual views. And I would say, to get back to free trade and open borders and all that, when Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn appear on the scene and call for the dismantling of these horrible free trade agreements that I had been fighting against for decades, I thought, oh, hooray! Hooray! Brexit's going to happen. We're going to destroy the Maastricht Treaty. We're going to get out of NAFTA. And I said that in 2015, and my progressive friends are all like, wow, why are you so racist? It's like, well, haven't we all been opposing these deals the whole time? But
why would they have been opposing those deals in the past?
Because we don't trust the free market. We don't trust the left doesn't trust any system that is regulated by capitalist market-driven principles. And if you regulate your trade, your migration, and your investments based on those principles, you can't rely on your society having a moral order. And, when I started in this crazy game,
What do you mean they can't? What does morals have to do with that?
if you hand over control of the most important things in your society to the invisible hand, that's not God, right? The invisible hand of capitalism is not God. It doesn't bend towards justice. It might do anything. It bends toward efficiency. I don't care about efficiency. I don't care about being extra rich. I believe in a moral order. And when I was a kid, this is really helpful. I'm realizing what my own thoughts were. When I was a kid, it was the Reagan Revolution. It was all about deregulation. It was about turning all of our power over to the invisible hand. That our economies had become inefficient, and we had to trust the moral order that the invisible-handed God would provide. And so back in the 80s, it was the left going, no, we need to make decisions consciously based on a moral theory, not hand things off to invisible, amoral forces. So, and I kept believing that. It's like, yeah, we'll make mistakes, but at least they'll be our mistakes.
Yeah. Okay, so 2015 rolls around. You're starting to have these questions. You're not verbalizing them. What happened next to get you?
Well, I would say I was able to keep going for quite a while because I was experiencing success. My institute became quite successful, and we were pretty intellectually independent. We had a reading group in Vancouver, a reading group in Surrey. We had all these people coming to our events. One of our members, Bowen Ma, was elected to the legislature. And we were very much part of the Bowen Ma, Don Davies scene in the NDP left. I had returned to the NDP in 2001, and so the party was doing well, my social scene was doing well, and I had a certain amount of license to express other unorthodox views that I held. And so I could handle suppressing certain unorthodox views if I got to express other unorthodox views or to come indirectly at problems, because I could see that there was a horrifying kind of identity politics that was emerging. Of course, most represented most extremely in the transgenderism movement. And now you see, I had known that movement for a long time. In 1996, Sven Robinson and I had supported the first viable transgender candidate for Vancouver City Council, Jamie Lee Hamilton, the brothel owner. I had, and in Toronto, that scene had intersected with my social scene. And so I hadn't at that point turned against transgenderism as a whole.
Yeah.
But what I could see was that very different people were involved in that movement, very frightening people, and the movement was acquiring all kinds of power while it was acquiring very frightening ideas. And there was a moment at my institute where a trans-identified man who believed himself to be a woman, big fan of mine, started attending my events. And we're doing this reading group, and we're looking at urbanism. So we're reading the classics, reading some Jane Jacobs about eyes on the street. This idea that your community becomes more safe the more people who are watching public spaces, and that regulates behavior. And these women in my group, one of whom, so both of whom were very long-time friends of mine, began speaking about their experiences of feeling unsafe as women on the street in Vancouver. And this gentleman, Nicole, he called himself, stood up and shouted them down because he felt they were being transphobic by talking about experiences that they had had as women that he had not. And they were therefore invalidating his sense that he was a woman. And I thought, well, this is not okay. And, when I spoke with him about his views, and he said, I just want you to let your friends know that I can do anything I want to them whenever I want to them, and that is my gender identity. And that is the gender identity of your average autogynephile trans-identified male. It is about hatred and punishment of women because they don't get to be one. And so it was that problem that eventually led to my rupture, the cancellation, and
So I know about
all of that.
I know about none of that.
So that's 2020.
Yeah, so you're part of this institute that you've created. You have this transgender male that stands up and has this discussion. How did it evolve into apparently you being canceled?
So my qualms with the effects of this gender identity movement were pretty profound. It was triggered by seeing this behavior because when I was associated with this community in the 90s or the noughts, it was illegal to perform these feminizing procedures on anybody except straight attracted gay men. These are, just gay men who wanted to be beautiful to straight men.
Yeah.
And who gravitated towards, often worked in prostitution. That was the community. But once you let any madman with a fetish do this, then the community fills up with the William Lyon Mackenzie King, J. Edgar Hoover, Rudy Giuliani.
Sorry, those are...
They were all cross-dressers.
Really?
Yeah.
Rudy Giuliani?
Yeah, it came out in his divorce proceedings.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's very domineering hypermasculine men often have a cross-dressing fetish. It's comorbid with the preferential rape fetish, for instance, because it's actually a form of hypermasculinity. It's not a form of femininity at all. Making your whole life revolve around a bizarre fetish you have is about as hypermasculine as life gets. So anyway, I'm observing this, and I'm also observing the knock-on effects in people's understanding of the nature of self. I'm seeing that we're producing a crisis in the human soul, irrespective of how many men are undergoing feminizing surgery or how many traumatized teenage girls are trying to make their bodies unattractive, all of that. I'm also seeing that if we normalize this understanding of the nature of self, we're cooked as a society. So I come at it quite obliquely. I start writing essays in 2018 about all this, and I'm also fighting this thing called the equity mandate in the NDP. where in
Which you
one of
would have
my
been a member of at that time?
yeah, I was a member. I was very unhappy with the direction the government took when we finally got back into power. I thought in 16 years they would have learned a lesson or two, but apparently not.
Yeah.
So, and they had this new rule where if a heterosexual white male is serving as a member of the legislature and they step down, he cannot be succeeded by another heterosexual white male. Those people are disqualified from seeking NDP nominations. And in Columbia River Revelstoke in 2017, this had been invoked, and then it looked like the party was going to nominate a lady in a wheelchair that no one liked. And so suddenly, this man who appeared to be a heterosexual white male met the equity mandate requirements. And so my first article, quite flippantly, and you can please prepare for a little crude language here, but this is how I started. My first piece on this was an essay in 2018 based on a conversation I'd had at the 2017 convention, because we lost that riding, entitled "Whose Cock Do I Have to Suck to Run for the NDP?" Because literally, that is what this guy had gone into a closed-door meeting and claimed to have done. And as long as you do that, then you're qualified to be a candidate. And I thought, well, this is insane. How could this be a qualification? This is not what I signed on for when I endorsed Sven Robinson. There is something weird has gone on here. And so I began denouncing a lot of these morbidities and a lot of this madness. And eventually, and then I left the NDP over their environmental policies.
Which you initially cared about, or you just thought they had come too extreme, or
No, they hadn't gone too extreme. They had come up with a scam. LNG Canada is a brilliant scam. I'm not a fan of fracking. It destroys agricultural land. I'm not a fan of any industry that exists at the expense of every other industry in its territory. I believe that the land base is something that we should be able to share. And if you're using industrial processes that make it permanently unshareable and unproductive for other industries, I got a beef with that. So they're building, right, we rolled out all those subsidies, $6 billion in subsidies to get LNG Canada built. But the reason it could get built is because the NDP and Greens had passed this thing called Clean BC, which meant that our coal, our wood pellets, and our liquefied natural gas are net zero coal, net zero wood pellets, and net zero natural gas. And what that means is that we can penetrate into European markets that won't buy regular natural gas. And so we can charge more money for our natural gas. Well, I don't like fracking and I don't like scams. And I don't like giant $6 billion corporate subsidies to companies like Royal Dutch Shell.
yeah,
So I quit the party, and I was at that point really on, and I tried to organize a protest party called the Eco Socialists, and I managed to do a press conference for it. I was briefly the leader of the party for like 6 days. I was trying to get Harold Steves, the former NDP MLA, to do it, but he balked at the last minute when his cancer came back. But my first press conference, I'm just remembering this now, what I said was, this NDP Green coalition that has been ruling this province, this is actually, that thinks that they're eco-socialists, this is actually Lucifer's mockery of eco-socialism. And I deliberately invoked the religious language because I knew it would be unexpected, but that was also my genuine opinion. I'm a big fan of the original meaning of the term counterfeit, which in the Middle Ages referred to Lucifer's mockery of the genuine article. And so, and at that point, my growing opposition to the transgender movement came out publicly. In particular, it was exposed by a man in a dress named Nicholas Sperling. He was the Green Party candidate in Coquitlam-Millardville. And he had been plotting on his Facebook page about another campaign against a lovely old school left Christian activist named Judy Graves, who had done all the palliative care for Jamie Lee Hamilton, that trans candidate back in the day. They had gone to the United Church together as children. There's nothing bigoted about Judy Graves, but she disagreed with where things were heading, and so she had been viciously canceled. All the programs to help homeless people that she had funded and founded, she was pushed out of. She was disfellowshipped from the United Church under pressure from organized labor. But the fact was, she was like still alive, having a life, walking her dog. And Sperling was furious about this. He was plotting about like how can we further immiserate this woman in her 70s, and her dog. And I got on his page said, do you know what this woman has done for your community when it had no other friends? Why on earth would you target Judy Graves? Now, that was reported in provincial media as a vitriolic transphobic screed. That's how it was described by Bob Mackin, the Tyee, etc. And it's always the same with these people. They never say what you said. They say that they can't print what you said because trans-identified children will kill themselves if they read it. So it gives them complete license to fabricate whatever you've said. So I lost 80% of my friends, was pushed out of the party, had to resign, suffered a significant breakdown because it was all through the provincial media that I was this monstrously evil bigot.
What was that experience like?
I was insane. You'd wake up, all these people who I thought were my friends, like I had a very large circle of friends, and watching all these people denounce and insult and just go after me in any conceivable way. Suffered a breakdown at work. My employer would rather take the wrongful dismissal settlement hit than reinstate me because although, I had a clean bill of health from my counselor and everything because, I was now the face of anti-trans bigotry in BC.
It must have been very confusing for you being a liberal your whole life and
Now just being, public enemy number one.
Because you wouldn't have felt like a conservative.
No, I really thought that I was following the old progressive views that I had always followed. And in many ways, I still harbor many of these views. I do call myself a conservative now, as of last year, but I'm a pretty weird conservative, right? I'm a tree-hugging anti-market conservative. Like that's a kind of conservative. There used to be more of us. I hope there'll be more of us again. And I've created this new organization, the Walafrid Strabo Conservation Society, to kind of group up other conservatives who have those perspectives.
And when you say anti-market, what do you mean?
I don't trust the invisible hand.
Okay, fair enough.
And I like.
So that's not anti-market. I would not call that anti-market. I would call that anti people.
Yeah, so I just anyway. So then my life fundamentally changed because I could no longer work as a college instructor because not only would no one hire me, I couldn't even get reference letters written because many of my referees were frightened that they would lose their jobs if they gave me letters of reference. And
do you think that the Liberals and how that has shifted over the last 30 years has happened because it's just like you're one-upping each other and it just like you're believing what the next guy tells you, and so you're trying to
it's an elimination game. It's musical chairs. It's Robespierre's Committee on Public Safety. Somebody is going to get canceled.
Yeah.
And if you don't move further left, you're going to get canceled. And so it's like a black hole. It's getting smaller. The pressure is increasing. We're going to have an event horizon. Like this is, and the more the pressure is, the higher the gravity, the harder it is to escape. because you know that you'll lose everything if you try to escape.
Yeah. Interestingly,
And
that happens actually in, I would say, very conservative circles as well.
oh yes,
And I think it comes from group thinking rather than individual thinking.
I would very much agree with that. But the main thing it comes from is fear.
Yeah.
These are not sincerely held beliefs. Generally, people don't even know what their beliefs are at this point if
No,
you're
but
so terrorized.
wouldn't you say your fear goes down the more deeply your belief goes?
No.
That's what I
The
experienced.
longer you stay in the scene, the more fearful you become because you're always watching other people being eliminated.
That's
and
right. So they're
persecuted.
they're not holding their beliefs that deeply. But the more,
No,
in
that's
my own
right.
experience, the more my own beliefs and the foundations of them have gone deeper, the less fearful I have felt of other people's beliefs.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely, and that's what you have to do. So there were, but I wouldn't be silent.
Fair
And
enough.
so that meant that there were 12 cancellation campaigns against me in total that were organized on social media or to push me out of work. Campaigns to get my fortnightly Dungeons and Dragons game shut down, to pressure everyone who was still socializing with me that they were going to lose their friends, their business, their jobs. It was, the last one took
What is
place.
motivating these people now? Is that money driven? Is there like a special, like being pushed that way, or what is getting people to go online and go after someone like you?
And yeah, and it's they focused online and they realized that I actually absorb their hate and feel it as a form of approval. So the online directed stuff didn't work. It was more like the weekly phone calls to,
Who is the
my
time?
old
Who is the time
friends.
for that? Someone must be paying that person.
Yeah, a lot of people in arts organizations, they're especially fearful. Your arts funding is totally contingent on your belief in gender weighing, and the Canadian arts sector is heavily subsidized. So if you work in an arts organization, some of it is entrepreneurial. There was one campaign that was all about trying to provoke me and a bunch of other people into denouncing Carousel Theater's drag camp for 6 to 10-year-old boys, which obviously is an absolute obscenity. Like, why are you teaching 6 to 10-year-old boys how to cross dress and dance provocatively for adult men? Are you insane? Anyway, CBC. Anyway, so it turned out that not enough kids had been enrolled in Carousel Theater's drag camp, and so they needed to fundraise, and in order to fundraise they had to create the appearance of opposition. So one of the Carousel Theater
Fascinating.
employees told Global News that I had threatened to kill her, which absolutely had never taken place. And then that allowed Global to promote a fundraising gala to hire extra security for the drag camp, and that allowed them to fill their budget hole, even though they were funded by 13 different government organizations. So they're just on the take on a huge scale. It looked like they were it looked like they weren't going to have enough money. And you'll notice these defund the police folks sure love hiring private security.
Okay, so you're being canceled, all these things. What's next for you? How did you end up coming to faith?
I I would say it was a series of very good coincidences. I chose to try and run for school board in 2021 in Prince George, where I was living at the time, on an anti-SOGI ticket, and I organized. And one of the people I organized with was a very very good man, one of my best friends in the world today, Nathan Gita. He is John Rustad's constituency assistant up north in Vanderhoof, and Nathan I had met in the best way. I had a show on community radio in Prince George, and I had been doing, and I'd volunteered to do sound for another show, and the other show had some very problematic content. These people were being quite explicitly racist towards Indigenous people and encouraging vigilante violence against them. And the guy doing this was the editor of the local newspaper. I exposed this. He became enraged, wouldn't have anything to do with me. And he said that he would tolerate me continuing to be on the community radio station if I did sound for the far right show, which was hosted by Nathan. And I think they assumed that Nathan and I wouldn't get along, but we just clicked immediately. And he was, I would say, my first really good social relationship with a truly faith-centered Christian. And I remember during his first interview, he was interviewing a man who had been homeless, who had been a meth addict. And this guy was talking about his conversion. And he said to Nathan, and Nathan said to him, "Yes, I too am a God-fearing man." And one of the things I really like is people who have the courage to say the tough stuff about their faith, who aren't sugarcoating anything. That yes, fear of God is part of this, and that is okay. Let's get that out front right away. So Nathan and I had a great friendship, and it's through him that I then became involved in the resurrection of the BC Conservative Party. I think when John Rustad crossed the floor and became the leader, I think you'll see my signature is the 7th signature on his nomination papers. I was right in on the ground floor of that. And although Rustad turned out to be a terrible person, and I'm not even speaking at a policy level, I think that his cruelty towards Lindsay Shepherd typifies the man, that you would make sure to deny a pregnant woman maternity benefits when you fired her, and then crow about that on the radio. That's an awful thing to do. But the thing was, there were a lot of great people, and it gave me this entrance into this whole new world. And so I ended up, I fled to Africa for a year because I couldn't take it. My main backer Ross arranged the thing. He's been a godsend. He's a Mormon elder, but his flavor of Mormonism is one I get on with quite well. And so when I got back from Africa, I ended up doing working out of a satellite office for the party in Prince George, and I met my pal Russ Kuykendall, who made a big contribution to my journey towards faith. He used to be a pastor. He was a theologian. We
So
spent a lot
did
of
these
time
guys
up
start getting you
late.
to start reading the Bible, or did they invite you to church, or what was
No,
was
it was the conversations, actually. It was just the conversations initially. They waited for me to ask to go to church.
Wise?
There was no hard sell. There was no hard sell at all. I just got to meet some really deep, really good people who were smart.
Was it surprising to you?
Yeah, I had no idea what Christian culture was like. I knew there were good people in it.
But like you becoming a part of the conservative movement after being liberal for so long,
Yeah.
and you started meeting these people that accepted you when you were just being canceled. Was
That's
that
right.
was that a somewhat surreal experience, or was it just?
Yeah, I was blown away by the level of generosity, of true tolerance, of true acceptance, and and also just being patient with me, but also just there's so much of the basics of this that is down here, not up here, that's really about having an embodied experience that is social and is real. More than, Russ and I had great conversations about politics, theology, all kinds of stuff, but he's the person, who made me actually understand that praying is a big part of what you do, that's an activity. So I started asking so he would always say grace before breakfast and dinner, and I started really looking forward to that. That grounded my thoughts, that grounded my day. And then after the election, I ended up getting a job in Victoria, and not for long. But that was an elimination game too. I think Rustad spent more on severance than he did on salaries that year. But I was asked by very foolish people because they knew the quality of my work in politics. They could see that they were getting me cheap and I had a skill set. And so somebody said, well, look, we're having this convention. We need you to do your old sheepdog job. The way you used to be a sheepdog for the far left of the NDP and sheepdog all these activists. We want you to do this with the Christian right. And I'm like, are you nuts? Uh, I, I only started going to church in November
Mm.
because I asked Russ to take me. And it's now 3 weeks later, and you want me to do this? Well, it turned out that that was actually a great thing to ask me to do.
Mm.
It was shockingly easy to just talk. And one of the things about conversion that I think people don't talk about, and I was very lucky, although he's since canceled me, my doctoral supervisor, Ken Mills, interestingly, the son of Beijing Bob Mills from the old Harper government, um, Ken worked in a field called conversion studies, or a subfield, or whatever you want to call it, which studied religious conversion at various times and places. And one of his points was when people convert, um, as much of conversion is about holding on to things as it is letting go of things or picking up new things. That, in these times of realignment and chaos, there might be old things about yourself that you want to keep or recover. And so, in many ways, what started happening was it's like the 1980s again.
Mm.
This is wonderful. We're like having a dinner party and we're just talking about normal things. We agree politically, but we're talking about our families. We're not like these liberals who just spend all day worrying and complaining about Donald Trump.
Mm.
Like, one of the things that was nice about the culture was that politics was back in perspective. And if your whole life has been doing politics, it's awful if all your dinner conversations are about politics. It's almost unendurable. And so I felt like, and so, I got to meet, Jan Webb, the former school trustee, and her husband Ron, who's just the salt of the earth. And the more people I met, the more, so meeting Richard and Tara Prosy during that process. And I'd come to Chilliwack briefly to help campaign for Heather Maws. So I'd met them before, but getting to know them better. And it was just, it felt so natural and easy and healthy. But I would say the point where I truly, the point where I could say I accepted Jesus Christ, I asked to be baptized, was I had been talking about this phenomenon of the person with the wrong amount of courage, because I don't think about the people who canceled me on day one. I think about the people who stuck with me for 5 years and then stabbed me in the back when I
Mm.
felt secure. That's done far more damage to me psychologically, economically, in every way. The people who were courageous enough to start the fight but not courageous enough to see it through.
Mm.
And when I was living in Tanzania, my next door neighbor, Christopher Ash, had great taste in film, and he screened this movie for me. It was movie night at his place every Thursday, and called Interstellar. And Interstellar has this great cameo of Matt Damon in the third act, and his character epitomizes the man with the wrong amount of courage. Courageous enough to travel to the edge of the universe, courageous enough to survey this ice planet, not courageous enough to die there. So but courageous enough to try and kill the people who come to rescue him so he can steal their ship. Uh, and I thought, that's it. It's the wrong amount of courage. And that's what's wrong with this person. And then I thought, I bet they thought that right up until the moment their courage failed them. I'm no different. I'm no better. On my own, my courage will inevitably fail me. No person is strong enough. We all have a breaking point. And if I'm going to make it, I need God's courage. That was the moment for me. It was realizing that I was being sucked into a peculiar kind of pride in my own virtue. And I suddenly realized where that was heading. It wasn't heading towards my moral exaltation, it was heading towards my inevitable moral failure because I thought I was enough, that I was that special,
That you could
that I
try to
was,
work hard
that I
enough,
was in
try hard
some
enough.
small way godlike. And that's when I knew I had to submit and I had to accept God's love and his help.
Thank you for sharing that. It literally fills me with joy. What was the experience up until that point? Did you start reading the scriptures and understanding who Christ was and the proof of the resurrection
I
or
read the Bible all the way through for the first time when I was 16. I took my master's degree. I studied with an amazing former Pentecostal pastor who'd become a professor of religious studies. I had, I had really heavily studied the New Testament during my master's degree. Those words, I mean, they did have power, right? The motto of my institute, I remember reading the motto that the institute would have 8 years before I said, "This is our motto." And it was, "And he taught them as one with authority and not one of the scribes." Because I could see where the university system was heading and that I had to get away from the intellectual corruption of all that, that we had to teach with authority and leave the tradition of the scribes, that the scribes had gone wrong. So the Bible has been an important text, but all I can tell you is that those words on their own didn't have the power that they did when they were united with community, because I mean, Jesus is pretty clear that he's not there. The church is not there if you're on your own. There has to be more than one of you to make that real. And it was much more the experience of Christian love, generosity, community, tolerance that animated the words on the page in a new way.
where you understood that he was who he said he was?
Yes.
Like, so who would you have believed God was before this?
What I used to say, because, right, there's some way in which, right, I was probably the most surprised that I converted. I think probably people who knew me saw it coming for years. That if they'd really known me, they could see all of these signs building up. And what I used to say to my secular friends when I was explaining the importance of the Bible, the importance to me, I would say, well, I think it's very important to read the New Testament because it reminds us that if you live an honorable life, if you behave with generosity and in a moral, upright way, if you stick up for your friends and always tell the truth, it should take the government about 3 years to hunt you down and kill you. And so the thing that people from my tradition, from the liberal tradition, struggle with is the divinity of Christ. That's the hard part. You can believe in the divinity of God, you can believe in the greatness of Christ, but it is that hypostasis that is the hardest intellectual, or I wouldn't even say intellectual, but it's the hardest emotional work for me and for I think most people. That's the handicap that we come with, is we want Mackenzie King's non-divine Christ. We
Which is where
we
this.
like we
I think
like
that's
him.
not natural to. I think humans. I don't think it's
Yeah.
actually your. I would say it's not to your upbringing or whatever the circles you come from. I think that's the human thing, because in churches you have lots of social gospel because of that same belief thinking that is when you believe that Jesus is the Christ,
Yeah.
actually God, and that he paid the price, well then you don't feel this pressure to meet up to a certain standard anymore, right?
Yeah. And and the other thing is, I think the hard lesson of politics for me, and it's not like I'm going to cease to be a practitioner of the art and try to do good with it and try
Yeah.
to use it as a form of witness, which is primarily how I used politics for most of my career. But it's also accepting that the kingdom is not of this world. And yes, I do. I am relieved by that. It
Yeah.
does.
Very relieving.
It does lift a burden from my shoulders.
Yeah. So what, having lived your whole life to try to make your wrongs right, and get to this utopia and world of everything being just and right, and now having have faith in Christ, realizing that this is not the kingdom that Christ came to save, just like the Israelites hoped, that he would save them from the Romans. Polyev isn't going to save us from
No,
Libya, from the liberals,
I still can't bring myself to join that party. I'm a
Yeah.
member of the provincial Tories, but I was listening to all of the lies that Polyev told as a frontbencher for Harper. Any lie Harper couldn't tell himself, he'd send that poor dude out to tell. That's
Yeah,
a burden. I think he's trying to make up for some stuff too.
yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So what has it been like the last years living with that relief? Living with that, like, have you become a more joyful person, more calm? Like, have you felt more
Oh, I've
peace?
definitely felt more centered. I mean, I was in therapy on and off from 1978 to 2022. I've received an insane amount of psychological and psychiatric care, and it was worse than useless, I would say. Replacing that with pastoral care and counseling and prayer has made all the difference in the world. I've in many ways faced tougher challenges in the past year than any year up to that point. I was unhoused for a few weeks. I'm really struggling in terms of career and things like that. But it's very different. It is very different because one of the great things, one of the great traditions. I see especially represented well in my church is when it's time to pray, you got a list of people to pray for. It's not all about you. Um, and I love that. I love that at the very moment where you're most tempted to drill into your own suffering, your own consciousness, your own problems, that instead you have this ritual that makes you lift your eyes and see everyone else. And I love that about it. It's been incredibly salutary for me that this ruminating, this introspection, this excessive rumination, introspection, it's ruining our society. Nobody gets saner by doing that, and
It reminds me of,
so
I'm not for sure if you're familiar with this pastor, but Charles Spurgeon has a quote that says, for every one look at self, take 10 looks to Christ.
yes,
Because we will get, and he's talking about it from not the angle of that the secular people are looking at themselves constantly, but from the Christian angle of like, I'm not good enough, and getting depressed because of that and saying, look to Christ as your hope. But similarly, I think you're saying is that in the secular culture of constantly looking at self, never is going to bring you insanity.
yeah. And so the other thing I would say is I think that we're also recognizing that prayer is actually a practice that you have to practice, that you have to get better at. I had an amazing experience over Easter where I was, there had been this sudden financial disaster, and my housing situation had also hit an iceberg, and uh, and friends of mine died. Friends of mine. It was a brutal time, and I was, and I was doing a lot of praying, and I also thought back to just to reconnect to a theme much earlier in our conversation. I talked about my love of people who free themselves. I started thinking a lot. My thoughts were directed towards this amazing hero of my youth, a woman named Ruby Dunstan. She had been the leader of a very strange political party called the Lil'wat People's Movement. It contested band council elections on the 4 St'át'imc Indian reserves in the 80s and 90s. She was the chief of the Lytton Indian Band when Lytton had the highest suicide rate of any Indian reserve south of 60 degrees. That is a crazy high suicide rate. It was a poor reserve, and she was not a wealthy person. And the Lil'wat People's Movement was focused on this fight over the preservation of the Stein Valley, which they ultimately succeeded in. And I heard her give a speech at the same event as Sven Robinson, the 1989 Stein Valley Festival, and what she had said was she didn't think about this as her being in conflict with the loggers or the settlers or whomever. She said, I realize that the problem with our people, the reason we're in the state we're in, is because we are spending all of our time talking and thinking about what we think the settlers owe us. And that's wrong. That has brought us here. What we need to do is think about what we owe them, what our obligations are. Our obligations are unchanged. It doesn't matter whether people are meeting their obligations to us. Our job is to protect this land for them. They're not going to do that on their own, so we will do that for them because that's our duty. And so she got elected and cut social programs, cut housing spending. The reserve was already poor, and she poured all that money into logging road blockades and lawsuits, and the suicide rate went way down because she had given people a sense of purpose, which was far more important to a people's survival than how many hours the clinic is open on the reserve.
Yeah.
And so I thought to myself,
This is what young men need nowadays, purpose.
Yes.
Way bigger than themselves and their own property and money and bank account.
exactly. And so I was thinking about that over Easter, and I thought, right, you know what I haven't done? I have been so focused on trying to keep myself going as a writer, try and keep myself going as, a minor political actor, trying to keep the lights on. Well, now it's finally come. I've lost my lease. I can't sign another one right away. What should I do? And I thought, right. What have you not been doing? You haven't been doing any work on conservation. You haven't, this is supposed to be the thing you care about most in your life. This has been your whole life. You're not, you know, you, my job is to, is to advocate for that. It doesn't matter that the world isn't living up to what I think it owes me. This is what I owe it. And I built this little Christian conservation group. And unlike most of the new projects I start, strangers started joining right away. And I thought, right, this is
Good for you.
this is the way forward. So, and I wouldn't have come to that without prayer. I would never have thought of structuring the organization the way I have, and it's connecting me to all kinds of things that are renewing my soul, and things are turning around in other ways because the Lord provides.
Yeah, that's awesome. How, like, now that you view things as that God, Christ's kingdom is not of this world, how, do you find yourself less motivated at all, or more focused on when you're talking to other people to get them to see that and believe the gospel? Because it's like almost switching your thinking from saving people for the next 80 years to saving people for the next 8 billion years, because it's an eternal thing, and when you believe in that, it's I mean, that's been definitely a big shift for me. So I was curious how you think through that.
Honestly, I have to say there are some things I'm taking a break from. I have been trying to convince my old friends, the ones who still talk to me, and my former political associates and whatever, that something's gone terribly wrong. I'm really just enjoying the ability to not talk much to non Christians these days. I'm enjoying my break from that. I'm sure I'll get back to it. But we live in such a heavily partitioned, tribalized society. Those people are inaccessible to me anyway. I've spent 5 years trying to tell people that they're on the wrong track.
Yeah.
They're still on that track. That's God's problem now. It's not.
Those guys that had an big influence on you in coming to faith, did they try to tell you were on the wrong track?
Never.
Okay.
Never.
So it's also,
I think I tell people I'm on the wrong track because I try to be pretty forthcoming about that. But people on the left see everything as an implied criticism, so it really wouldn't matter what I said. Just by virtue of existing in their space is an act of bigotry to them. So I can't deal with that scene anymore. It's like we've actually partitioned the country. Like, I live in India now, they live in Pakistan now. It doesn't matter that we used to be next door neighbors. Yeah. We may not, I may still be next door neighbors with some of these people, but they are so far away.
Yeah. I think the only way to combat it is through one-on-one individual relationships and getting to know people over time, and you actually get to see the character. I mean, there's a really good book Rosaria Butterfield wrote called The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert, and she was a lesbian English professor that came to faith, and the pastor that invited her over, she actually got a letter on one of the articles she wrote in a newspaper, and she didn't know what pile to put it, the negative or the positive.
Oh, I love it.
Yes, and so she reached out to him, and she was invited over for lunch, and then they had lunch, a meal together once a week for, I think, over a year, and they never invited her to church either, but they took interest in her and loved her, and she observed them, and that is eventually what won her over. And I think now she's written a second book called The Gospel Comes with a Door Key or a House Key, which talks about how evangelism and sharing the gospel is so relational.
Oh, yes.
And it's not going to work by the traditional ways of things, because I care about the gospel a lot. I'd love to see Canada become have a revival, but I think it's not going to happen by our Facebook posts. I think it's going to happen by knowing people that are of different belief systems and caring about the person, and not smacking them over the head because of their views.
Well, that's one of the things where I changed my Facebook settings recently, because I don't want my liberal friends to see my political posts anymore. No good ever comes of it.
Yeah.
For them to try and retain or recover a sense of me as a person, it's exactly right. You can't lead with the ideas. You can just remind people that you are a person, that you're and that you have a relationship with them that was once vibrant and important. And so with my friends who are not Christians, I used to have a more active, what I would call, retention strategy, but I burned out on it. I just keep losing people. So instead now, when something comes up that triggers a memory of shared experience, I'll write a little note to someone about an experience we shared, just to remind them that we were friends, that yes, they're frightened of it being known that they speak to me, or that they've seen me.
Yeah, I mean, they're frightened of the blowback that it gives them.
Yeah.
They're likely not frightened of you.
No, they're not. I mean, well, some of them are because it hurts, right? It hurts to see someone that you have hurt without justification.
Yeah. I want to wrap up. Just like a few questions. You're new to the Christian culture. What's been some things that you've not liked, or that have been unique and surprised you, maybe because you have you were when you've been a part of the culture your whole life, you're somewhat blind to a lot of the things that aren't necessarily great about it. And so I'm always interested to talk to people that are new to the faith to be like, hey, what are you seeing that maybe we don't see?
It's not really like I wouldn't make a criticism exactly, but what I would say is, I mean, well, there's one criticism, and that is a sense that a greater willingness to accept that those in power have the right to push you around. Uh, I think that 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 and that there's a reason for that. The kingdom's not of this world, et cetera, et cetera. We pray for our leaders to be wise, et cetera. But I think it's gone a bit too far. Um, you ask, somebody tells a Christian school trustee that SOGI just is provincial policy, and you've got to do this or you've got to do that, and it's often accepted, and it's like, no, you got to go kicking and screaming. You fight tooth and nail. You don't relinquish things. You don't relinquish things to the enemy voluntarily. If the enemy wants to take things, the enemy can take them. He's powerful enough. He controls the state. He's got a lot going for him. So you don't need to be submissive on top of that. So I would say that the culture's a little more submissive than I think history calls it to, but I think that's self-correcting and necessarily so. The other thing, though, is
I think it's also a result of a lot of people that call themselves Christians aren't Christians.
yes. I think that I think I probably look. I think I look more effeminate in this culture than I did in the last one. I don't know how to drive. I don't know how to work with my hands, but I'm a really good cook. And it's really weird that I sign up for women's volunteer activities at church. And I think people find that a little odd. I actually think that my Christian friends are more likely to think I'm gay than my non-Christian friends. And that kind of cracks me up because, I joined a pretty conservative branch of Christianity, and somehow this makes me look gayer to my new friends. That's been amusing to me, but I'm just enjoying the irony.
Yeah. I think that's also a result of the liberal gay agenda being pushed so hard that there's been a reaction in culture to that I don't want to do anything that might be perceived as that, because the last thing I want to do is be perceived as gay, and so that's kind of like just pushed quite far. You even see it in friendships. I think male friendships are one of the things that are massively lacking in our culture, but it's like the Jonathan and David story in the Bible. Jonathan says he loved David more than his wife,
Right.
and not in a sexual way. Like they were friends. They knew each other, and they prayed together, and they knew each other's fears and sins and stuff like that. And that whole, I think the lack of that happening in the church and Christian circles, I think, is partially in response to like being close to guys like now might be perceived as gay or weird, and so.
Oh yeah, no, that really came through when I was living in Africa, because if you live in a society where you pretend that no one's gay, men can hold hands, right? All kinds of things can happen because you're not foregrounding that, and there are good, as I was saying earlier, good evolutionary biological reasons that men have to compartmentalize stuff or think in particular ways. But when I was in Tanzania, it was like, a lot of people, Africa got a lot of guff by it wouldn't handle the AIDS crisis the way everybody else did, and a lot of people died because they wouldn't. But in the 80s, I actually don't think things would have gone the way they did without AIDS. I don't think that we would have ended up here. We had to make some very quick, snap decisions to prevent people from dying. And we did that by choosing to be hyper transparent about what men get up to in behind closed doors. And that's not good for a society. That is a thing that societies should shut up about. Women should gossip about bad men and what they do behind closed doors. That's very important.
Why is that
I got no beef with that.
Why is that important?
Because it's self-protective, right? Women, you want to know who the predators are. You want to know who the violent men are. You want to know who the abusers are, because we can kill them with our hands and they can't do the same back. So you want to grant women the ability to gossip about that stuff, but also women aren't up to doing all the sick things men are, and that's good too.
Yeah.
And so, living in a culture where people went, yeah, we just chose not to be transparent about that. We know a bunch of extra people died, but we're a healthier culture than you now because we took that hit then.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't go back in time and change what we did. You have to save lives using the methods that you can and the
Yeah.
information that you can. But we don't acknowledge that we paid a price. That putting those pride parades out there, the pride parades changed because of the AIDS crisis. The pride parades started out with people dressed normal, acting normal, going, hey, it's okay to be gay. We're normal people too. And they transformed into this utter, monstrosity that they are today,
It's awful.
where you're celebrating something you shouldn't even talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. And which is almost a direct quote from the scriptures of the things that are, you used to do the things that are too shameful to talk about. I think Paul writes to one of the churches. Stuart, it's been an awesome chat. I really appreciate you taking
Oh,
the
a
time.
pile of fun. Thank you so much.
Yes, I think I'll have you love to have you back on in the future, because I think there's lots we can learn from you. I have lots of questions about even just youth engagement and about politics in Canada and lots of other stuff. But I definitely enjoyed it. I went on your website this morning, which maybe you can refer people to what that is. What I like about it is that you have your essays on there from the last 13 years. You haven't deleted the ones that you would now disagree with, and that you can see your change over time. What the content? What are you doing now? Maybe just update people on how to follow you.
So you can find me at stuartparker.ca. That's the main website. I'm easy to find on Substack, easy to find on Twitter. Made myself a little less easy to find on Facebook, but there's still a public page of my stuff. And on Amazon, you can purchase a 5-volume softcover collection of my essays over the years that, you're quite right, track a lot of change, but also some consistency. The first essay I wanted to write, during the Harper prorogation crisis back in 2008, I still stand behind that essay 100%. There are some essays I don't stand behind, but I'm not ashamed of. And there are some essays I'm ashamed of, but I'm continuing to write. And also, if you join my Patreon or my Substack, I release 2 chapters of my memoirs that I'm writing every month. They are paywalled, or at least half of each chapter is paywalled. And it's called 50 Years of Failure. And it's a chronicle of the many great rooms I have got to be in, because I am so fortunate, all the experiences that I have got to have doing the work that I've got to do. And finally, I still teach online courses. My new course is starting in about a week and a half. History of BC politics.
This is being recorded on the 29th of May, by the way, for anybody listening. So
yes,
a week and a half from now might have happened.
Oh, yes. Okay. So, so about a quarter of the way into June, my course starts up. And there's also on my Substack an archive of, I think, the 20 courses that I have taught since leaving the university system, that I've taught for no credit to an online audience. There's some fun stuff in there. So anyway, piles of stuff. If people want to take a look.
Cool, awesome. Thank you very much, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode and my chat with Stuart. If you did, it does help a lot if you just go and give the episode a thumbs up or leave a comment. Comments help it rank better. I love sharing this kind of stuff, or just share it with a family member or a friend. I think that's awesome. But either way, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace. Thanks, man.
All right, that was a lot of fun. Thanks for just letting me run on about all this stuff.
Yeah. I love. It's called the Furiously Curious Show for a reason.
Yeah, no, you do it. You do a great job. It's a good style. Yeah.
Well, if you could come in.